Fnatic are a brand focused on esports and gaming performance, and the Focus 3 mousepad appears to be a continuation of that strategy. When they reached out for the review, they told me that the intention of the Focus 3 was to deliver an affordable, high-quality pad for gamers on a budget who didn't want to have to compromise. Now, as someone who typically uses high-end pads from brands like Artisan or X10, I was interested to see how a more budget-oriented pad would stack up against them in terms of feel. I also use a variety of mice and swap frequently for reviews, so I was keen to see how the pad held up across a variety of shapes, skates and weights. Now, the Focus 3 is available in 3 sizes: medium, large and desk mat, with pricing and dimensions shown on screen. The review sample that I have is the large size, as this most closely compares to the typical 400 by 450 pads that I usually play on. Priced at $19.99 USD or your local equivalent, my first impressions were that of pleasant surprise at just how well built this pad was. It does ship rolled, but immediately laid flat on my desk, and aside from a little odour from the rubber, was otherwise good to immediately use. The edge stitching is consistent and tightly knit. It's smooth to the pad, so you won't feel any tactile bump if you do drift a little bit too far and go over the edge. It's a plain black pad with the only branding being an orange dyed Fnatic logo in the corner. The back of the pad is a natural rubber and stuck to a wooden laminate, acrylic base and polished desk equally well with no slipping. Fnatic described the weave of this pad as a micro knit that has been heat treated to be silky smooth, providing a consistent mouse glide. I tested it with various sensors, including the 3389, and whilst the micro knit is a tight weave, it had none of the spin out issues caused by a similar weave density on the Artisan Raiden most notoriously. It's also incredibly water and humidity resistant, displaying similar properties to a Cordura pad while still retaining the softness of a traditional cloth pad. Fnatic claim the XY axis have the same glide and dynamic friction, and whilst this may be true, there does seem to be a little bit more resistance on the Y axis, but nowhere near as stark as something like the Artisan Hien or Hayate Ku on the X axis. There's also no coating, so you should expect your glide to remain consistent as you use this pad. I can say that over the past month or so, I've noticed no change in the glide whatsoever, even under heavy use. In games, I found the pad to be quite a unique experience. It's advertised as a control pad, but still has quite a lot of speed due to the smooth surface area and low friction when in motion. Despite this, it retains a lot of the initial static friction when moving the mouse from a stationary position for micro adjustments, but once the mouse is in motion for flicks, it glides much more smoothly with little to no resistance. The best way to describe it is kind of the inverse of moving your hand in water, where slow movements are smooth, but faster movements you feel much more resistance. This quality alone made performance on this pad quite dependent on the mouse I was using. Heavier mice, or those with poorer quality skates that already had a lot of force required for their initial movement, had that amplified on this pad, and I found that something like the Death Adder V2 Pro on its stock skates was a pretty miserable experience. Conversely, lighter mice or those with better skates performed exceptionally well on the Focus 3. In particular, the greater initial friction on micro adjustments meant my tracking play significantly improved without sacrificing speed for flick shots and target acquisition that you typically would have to on a control pad. Now, I tend to start all of my pad comparisons with a QCK, as it's a good control pad that most people have had at least some experience with. The Focus 3 felt immediately faster and smoother even when making micro adjustments. I then went through a lot of pads to try to find comparables to help you make a purchasing decision, and narrowed it down to the following 3. The Corsair MM200 Pro, the Corsair MM350 Championship, and the Tiger Esports Longteng. Now, none of these 3 had exactly the same qualities, though the Longteng had the closest glide, but had much less initial static friction for micro adjustments. The MM200 was also water repellent and had a similar glide, but needed a much heavier force to get the mouse initially moving, making micro adjustments on it a lot more cumbersome. It was also thicker at 6mm and had no edge stitching. In terms of sponge density on the Focus 3, it most closely felt like the Longteng or MM200 Pro, and I'd compare it to an Artisan Soft for those familiar with the brand and feel of the sponge. Things I'd like to see Fnatic potentially revisit on this pad are pretty sparse, but firstly would be the logo design choice. It's discreet and won't impact gameplay, but the orange will likely clash with a lot of cleaner desk themes, and a nice silver or white would have been more neutral and versatile for more users. Next would be the irregular size choice for the large. At 487 by 372, it's shorter than the competition, and personally I think a more standardised size would have probably been a better choice here, something like 450 by 400. Finally, with it being water repellent, it may become difficult to clean over time compared to traditional cloth pads. Having said all that, do I think this pad is good value and does it have a place in the market? Absolutely, but only if you go in knowing what you're buying. The pad has unique properties and friction characteristics, and as such performs vastly differently based on the mouse you intend to use it with. As mentioned, heavier mice or mice with poor quality skates really will not get the best experience out of this pad. Similarly, people who want consistent friction and resistance irrespective of motion speed also likely won't get on with it. But if you're using anything under 80 grams with half decent skates, then I'd probably suggest the pad is at least worth a shot to see if the additional friction helps you to tighten up your tracking and recoil control as it helped me. Ultimately, one of the biggest selling points here for me is the $20 price tag on the large. It's budget friendly, and if I only had $20 to spend on a pad, this would absolutely be one of my top choices, having spent time with it. At the start of this review, I said that Fnatic advised me the Focus 3 was an attempt to deliver a performance pad at a budget-conscious price, and on that, I can absolutely say that the Focus 3 delivers on what they intended to do.